So I've come across a few interesting ideas about this year's, what's going to be happening this year. Some people say that Nostradamus has prophesied, and in his books of prophecy, le prophéties, however you pronounce it, there's all different types of interesting prophecies about the year 2021. One of the great things about Nostradamus's prophecies is that in hindsight is 2020. Yes. Everything always goes back to 2020. So basically, we can take Nostradamus's teachings and try to find them, amalgamate them, and make them fit into any way that people want. I think people now claim that Nostradamus predicted 9/11 because he wrote that in the year 1999 there'll be something flying out of the sky. So that was the start of, I don't know, some type of Islam attack that eventually culminated in September. There's all types of things. The fascinating thing is that Nostradamus actually came from a Jewish family.
Oh, wow.
And his family converted. Now, when I say his family converted, they probably were force converted. They were in the region of where, you know, they were part of France, but at the time they were probably affected by the Inquisition and things like that. So he has Jewish blood, and it makes sense for a Jewish boy to come up with some interesting ideas. I'm not saying that everything that Nostradamus has predicted is not true. He was an astrologer, and there's a certain power of astrology and the ability to look into the sky and into the galaxies and to be able to send messages. This is something that we know from a very far back. As a matter of fact, the concept of astrology being able to foretell the future appears in this week's portion, because in this week's portion we talk about astrologers prophesizing what was going to happen. And who were they going to talk about? They were prophesizing about the greatest prophet in all of history. How interesting is that? So Nostradamus meets Moses in this week's portion. Why? Because Nostradamus was an astrologer. The whole story in Egypt is very much affected by the astrologers. So let me give you a little bit of a background. When Pharaoh, in this week's portion, after Joseph and his brother passes away and he enslaves the Jewish people, the astrologers come to him eventually and say that there's going to be a liberator, a leader of the Jewish people that's going to free the Jewish people. And they announce the time and date that is going to be born. And what they do is they go and they look at all of the pregnant women living around Egypt that were due around that date. And funnily enough, the person that was, of course, the mother, her name was Yocheved, Moshe's mother, actually was not due yet. It was not her due date. And she gives birth 3 months early. So they did not suspect her. They hide her for 3 months, and then when they're about to come back to check, he puts her in the water. Now, the astrologers say that the leader of the Jewish people, they can see in the future that he's going to be struck down by water. So therefore, Pharaoh makes a decree that any child that's born in Egypt, whether the child is Jewish or Egyptian, they don't know at that point whether the child is going to be Jewish or Egyptian. It's not clear in their astrology, should be thrown into the Nile. So what are we seeing? We're seeing that the Torah is telling us about what these astrologers have prophesied, what they've told into the future, and it doesn't say that it's not true. It says that there's actually a truth to what is going on, what is being told. Everything that they predicted came true. The only issue with their predictions is that they have no clue about what it's actually talking about. They say the Redeemer will be born on this day. They don't know who it is, what's the situation. That was true. He was born on that day. They didn't realize it was only 3 months premature, and they never suspected. When Moshe's casket was actually placed as a baby into the Nile River, the astrologers said, according to some opinions, the astrologers actually said he's actually in the water. He's been killed. So you have nothing to worry about anymore. So a lot of what they actually told was for some strange reason, which the reason is because there's an element of truth. God reveals secrets to us in the future about the world, which is a fascinating concept. So can we say outright that prophecies and future fortune telling is false? We cannot do that. We cannot say that. We cannot say, as a matter of fact, from a Jewish perspective. Could we say it from a scientific perspective? I don't know. I haven't looked into it scientifically. But what we can say for certain is that in Judaism, we're not supposed to look into the stars to know the future, because they end up getting you more confused and having more issues than if you were to just kind of go with the flow and trust God. So we're supposed to go with the flow and trust God, but God does give us something else. He gives us prophets. And that's where we get into the other part of our discussion, is the concept of prophets. And we know that the Torah tells us that there was never one of the principles of faith. There's 13 principles of faith. One of the principles of faith is that we have to believe in the concept of prophecy. It's a principle of faith. And I'll describe to you what that actually means. But in Maimonides' principle of faith, that the commandment to believe in prophecy, he says we should believe that God has given prophecy to mankind, that there are certain people that receive messages from God. And we as Jewish people have a fundamental belief in that concept. It's so important that it's one of the ikram, it's one of the fundamental pillars of Judaism. Why? Because if we have no prophets, we have no Judaism. First and foremost, obviously, Moshe is the one that gave us Judaism. So that's why he's the prophet of all prophets. And that's the second part. One of Rambam's concepts, Maimonides' concepts, is not that there are just prophets, but the greatest of all prophets is Moshe. Moshe was unique in his prophecy. Now, why am I telling you about prophecy? Why are we talking about prophecy tonight? Well, for many reasons. Number one, the reason why I'm talking to you about prophecy is because one of the topics, ideas that we're going through in our talks is the order of the mitzvot according to the way Maimonides puts them in the 613 order, mitzvot. The mitzvah that we happen to be up to is the mitzvah of prophecy, of believing that God gives prophecy, ideas, and tells the future to certain human beings. So we're actually up to that. Reason number two why I'm choosing this topic is because in our portion is all about the birth of the greatest prophet in history. And of course, last week's show, we touched on one of the most unique prophecies of history, the prophecy of Jacob about the coming of the Mashiach. And of course, having entered into the year 2021, with all different people coming up with all types of ideas about what prophecies are actually happening or what's going to be happening this year, it's another reason to be discussing the concept of prophecy. So I think we have plenty of reasons to justify our topic. I think somebody wanted to mention something. Did somebody want to mention something before we delve into the whole idea?
Of
Yes.
course. What happened? Coronavirus back in Melbourne. What happened?
Okay.
What happened? The Mashiach coming.
Mashiach's coming. Nachon, Ruben, nachon. Okay, Joe, what did you want to say then?
Actually, I had a question. The English word is prophecy and prophets, but the Hebrew word, does it translate the same way? What's the Hebrew for Hebrew for prophet? Navi, yeah?
Is a prophet is enough.
But prophecy
נבואה.
is
כמה כסף אתה עושה, פרופט? כמה כסף אתה עושה? זה פרופט.
no, not that sort.
Ruben
So
says the other type of prophet. Prophet is also how much you make.
Profit, how much money you do?
but that's less predictable.
That's
So, and I was thinking the translation, to English is the Navi is. Does it really translate the way we use the word in English? That prophecy is predicting what's going to happen in the future. But is that what it means in the Hebrew?
Well, you bring a valid point. That the truth is that you could say that about almost every idea, that there's very little that you could properly translate from the holy tongue, from Lashon Kodesh into Hebrew, into English, or into any other language, because Lashon Kodesh is a God-made language, as opposed to all other languages are man-made. And when men come up with ideas, they have far little in comparison to what God. So that's why when you look at the Hebrew language, not the Hebrew language as in modern Hebrew, but the old Hebrew language, you will see layers upon layers of depth. And within the word Navi or Nubuah and all these words, you will find different words that are hinted to it. And it's not just, it's like a whole makeup. But the truth is, I never had time to look into the etymology of the word Nubuah. And I believe the word prophecy has probably like any other English word, some type of Latin background that means, something about fortune telling or telling the future. But you do make another point, which is valid, that the word Nubuah sometimes could have different. It's not necessarily just telling the future. It really means a person that receives messages from God. So I don't know what the correct term for it is, but I'm hoping that over the next 45 minutes or so we'll get more clarity on that. Okay, any other points before we get into the meat and sauce of this discussion? Okay, so let me show you a couple of things on my screen now, if you don't mind. Oh, it's not open. I thought it was. All right, so if you were to look, what's the source of belief in the Torah, that we have to believe in prophets from the Torah? Where do we see this concept? If you look over here, it says, verse 15, Navi mikir b'cha, me'achechem yakim lecha Hashem lekecha. A prophet from amongst you, this is from Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 15. He will get up for you. Hashem, your God, will bring up from you. So what does he say? What's the next words? These are the important words. You shall hearken to him. Elav tishmoun. What does that tell us? That tell us that you actually are obligated to listen to the prophets. Okay, so that's the first thing. Now, if I can quickly find the thing, that's the positive commandment. There's actually a double commandment about this, and that is, look over here. Lo tenasu es Hashem Elokechem, verse 16. You shall not try the Lord your God as you tried him in Massa. Now, this is I'm not going to get into all the details, but this is also the hint to the concept of when we weren't willing to listen to the prophet, and telling us that we have to believe the prophet, not try to test God. Okay, so that's our commandments within the Torah, where we see the concept of prophecy in the Torah. Now, of course, when we're talking about in this week portion, when we're going to talk about prophets, there's Moses and then there's everybody else. Why is Moses in a category in and of himself? Why would you think, in other words, we know that Moshe had a different connection. Moses, it says only about Moshe, it says, Panim el Panim diber Hashem el Moshe. We know that when Batya, the daughter of Pharaoh, finds Moshe in the casket, in the basket in the Nile, she tries to get him to feed and he refuses to eat. And then Miriam says, oh, let me get him a Jewish woman and he'll eat from the Jewish woman. How did Miriam know that he was going to eat from a Jewish, that Moshe was going to eat? Why did she think that? So she realized as well, first of all, she's been living with her mom and they had no issue. But also, she knew that something very unique had happened when Moshe came into the world. We're told that there was a physical light that shined up their house when he entered the world, not just a spiritual light. And therefore, she knew there was something special, and she reckoned that this child was not supposed to be eating from a Gentile mother. Now, the commentators tell us, like Rashi, he says, why was he not supposed to eat from a Gentile mother? Because he was going to be talking, he was going to be receiving the Torah from Hashem. So Hashem wanted him to eat from his mother alone. So he ate only from his own mother, and he wasn't willing to eat from anybody else. His mother had a very high standard of a diet of kosher food, and that's all that Moshe should be able to. Moshe was supposed to be the purest person. He was pure from beginning to end, right? Nothing else. So therefore, Moshe was unique, that he was the only prophet that had to live in such a high level that God spoke to him mouth to mouth. It means that they had a direct conversation. Why did Moshe have to have that connection unlike anybody else? What about Joshua? What about Samuel? Why didn't those people need that connection, but Moshe did? It's a question I'm asking you. Why do you think Moshe needed such a special unique? It wasn't just that God gave it to him, but he needed to have it because of the role that he had different to other prophets.
We had a lot more to contend with, both from within Am Yisrael and from Paro.
Okay, why?
Because he was going to encounter opposition wherever he goes, both from within. The whole way he was encountering opposition from Am Yisrael and from Pharaoh. So I think maybe he needed the biggest chizuk.
Okay, could be. It's a good point. Okay, I'll take that's a fair point. I wouldn't say he was unique about that, because we'd have Elijah the prophet who struggled a lot with the people. Most of the prophets struggled with the people. You know, when you look at down later Nevi'im prophets, you'll find them all fighting with the people and the people not willing to listen to them. So Moshe wasn't unique in that regard. Although there is a point to what you're saying, that he was the first prophet of the Jewish people, as in the leader of the Jewish people had become a nation. Yes, go Joe.
I'll take a guess. He was the only prophet or leader to know the day of his death in advance, and that was part of his role as being the first true, all-encompassing teacher, the first rabbi, effectively. Okay,
I don't know if he was, first of all, we don't know exactly that he knew his day of death when he knew it. We knew that he knew he was going to die beforehand. Could we say that he was unique in that knowledge? I don't know. I'm sure there was other prophets that knew the day of when they were going to die.
But he was taught the day when he was taught the entire Torah.
Okay. So you mentioned a valid point, but I don't know if that's possibly unique. But what's unique to Moshe? What's totally unique to him? This is what I want you to remember. This is very interesting. I'll preface by giving you a story that happens in the time of Joshua. Now, don't forget that people had been living, in the time of Moses, the people are living in a very unique time. It's the most unique time in history, because the exodus of Egypt, they become a nation. So first of all, he has to need something really powerful because he has to actually make them into a nation. Number one. So Noah kind of touched on that point. So you could say that concept. He has to contend with these people that are going to be testing the truth and the validity of their unique role in the world. Okay. But more importantly, and this is where it becomes really interesting, when Moshe passes away and Joshua takes over as leader, something interesting happens. A question, a halachic question, what to do in a particular circumstance, I can't remember offhand what exactly the circumstances was, comes about, and Joshua doesn't know the answer. What do you think the Jewish people tell Joshua to do? What does Joshua do when he doesn't know the answer to a question? This is a fascinating idea. What does he do? You were saying Enoch, he asks God. Okay. So everybody says to him, go and ask God. You don't know the answer, ask God. Couldn't Joshua have thought of that himself? Why does Joshua need the people to tell him to ask God? And the answer is he doesn't. Because you know what his reply is? His reply is, I'm not Moses. I can't ask God. These people have been living with Moses for the last 40 years. Every time Moses has a halachic question, what to do, what does Moses do? What does Moshe do? He goes and asks God. Comes along Joshua, and he has a question. He's not sure of something. The people say, do what your teacher did. Ask God. Joshua says, sorry, I can't do that. Why can't you do that? Oh, because I'm not Moshe. I don't understand. You took over Moshe's role. No, I didn't. Moshe had his role. I have my role. Moshe's role was unique. What was unique about Moshe's role? Yes, no.
I have a question about this. If Bil'am can go and ask Hashem what to do, why can't Joshua?
Okay, let me ask you a question. When Bilam wanted to ask, it's a good point because it will help us understand everything else. When Bilam asked Moshe, God what to do, what did he do?
He got an answer. It's not the answer he wanted, but he got an answer.
What did he do?
Hashem put words in his mouth. Hashem put words. Hashem put words.
He went to sleep, and when he was sleeping, he had a dream, and God appeared to him in his dream. When Moshe had a question to God, what did God tell him to do?
I don't remember.
To bless the Jews.
He said, God, I need the answer. And God gave him the answer.
Okay.
He got to sleep. He didn't wait for a dream. He went and he had a thing. But why? Why did Moshe have that? And why?
He had a direct line.
Other prophets, Joshua was a prophet too. When Joshua wanted to find the answer to something, what did Joshua do? Here's the thing. If it was a question of halakha, what to do in Jewish tradition, what did Joshua do? Did he go to sleep and wait for God to give him the answer like other prophets? Did he go outside and dance like what other prophets had done? No. He says, fascinating. This is what he says. He says, no. Moshe, when he needs to know the answer, he is the source. So he needs to get it from the source. He is the source of the answer. But once Moshe is gone, we have all the answers. Anything that we need to know, we've been told. When it comes to halakha, now we have to figure it out ourselves. So prophecy no longer is to teach us Torah in general. There are exceptions to this concept. But prophecy is no longer going to be used to study the Torah. Prophecy, it's called the Torat Moshe. Moshe's prophecy was not just to tell us the future, but more important to tell us the will and the desire of God. There's two concepts. There's the Torah. The Torah is what God wants from us in the world. Who's the one that gave us that idea?
Moshe.
Who gave us the Torah? Moshe. Moshe needed to have a direct line with God, no interpretations, no visions, no dreams. It had to be as clear as possible. Moshe was given, this is the word, you write the word exactly in this way. Don't change, not an iota. And this is the interpretation. Don't write this down, but explain this to the people and to your students. Explain this to Joshua. Now, after Moshe's gone, there's no more questions to be asked. Anybody that has a question for the future, you got to go take the oral Torah, all those explanations, including the principles that are provided, that Moses had received from God orally, providing the Jewish people with 13 principles. Go and use those principles to figure out the answer yourself. There is no such thing as prophecy within understanding Torah anymore. Prophecy is to tell us how to behave in general. It's to tell us about what's unique about our generation. It's to tell us about the future, whether we should go to war. It's not for halachic decisive answers. A prophet cannot one day come up and say, this is such an important feature. Why is it such an important feature in prophecy and understanding prophecy? Because the only person that ever had the ability to teach us something new and radical and give us a new commandment was Moses. Moshe can say, listen, there's 613 mitzvot. Finished. Once Moshe dies, there's nothing else. You cannot add, change anything. All the information is been given. There's nothing else that you need. So when Joshua has a question, he can't just jump up to God and answer the question. Because you only go to God to answer if you have something new to learn. There's nothing new to learn. Now you've got everything. Now you've got to figure it out yourself. So Moshe leaves. He's taught all 613 commandments, explained them all. Now you're going to have questions and questions, and you're going to analyze in every situation, answer to thousands of questions within each law. I've given you principles. Figure it out yourself. That's our partnership within the Torah. Why is this so important? It's so important and crucial because you want to understand what's the uniqueness of Moshe and his prophecy. Moshe wasn't really just a prophet. He was the ultimate intermediary between God and the Jewish people to give over the will and desire of God. Every other prophet is there to tell us messages from God, but not to tell us what God's ultimate desire and will is. That was given over to us by Moshe. Why is this so crucial? Because when a guy 2,000 years ago wants to stand up and say that he was born on the 25th of December, and I want you to know that from now on, you don't have to follow these laws because Saturday is not a great day to keep the Shabbat. God told me you must keep the Shabbat on Sunday, and you don't have to worry about the 613 laws. There's a whole bunch of other laws. What do we say to him? Are you Moses? No. Okay, so then you can't change anything. This is the ultimate protection to the Torah. This is so crucial because the first sign of a false prophet is the second they try to do anything like Moses does. Tell us something we should change within the Torah. As soon as a prophet tells you to change anything in the Torah, what do you know? They're false. So if you want to know who's a legitimate prophet, first and foremost, know this. A prophet will never, ever, ever go against Moses. So first and foremost, if you want to figure out who is a good prophet, you'll have to figure out, does he follow the word of Moshe to the T? So if you wanted to become a prophet tomorrow, you'll have issues. But the first thing you're going to have to do is you're going to have to go back and you're going to have to study the Torah Moshe, and you're going to have to know every law, and you're going to have to abide by it to the T, to the best of your ability. If I see you doing that, then you can try to work on prophecy. You can't have no moment of wasting time. Don't play no games. You've got to be always cheerful and happy. You've got to be fully engrossed in the Torah every single moment, living your life to the T like Moshe, that way the Torah describes it. And then, on top of that, you'll have to start prophesizing. Your prophecies will have to become true, and then I will acknowledge you as a prophet. So how does Judaism, beyond all other religions, able to protect ourselves from imposters, from JC's standing up one day and saying, I'm God, or I have, or there's Paul standing up and saying, here's the New Testament. How do we protect ourselves from this? God told us there's one, Joshua told us that there was one true prophet that was able to tell us what to do. Not only that, that second thing, what I showed you now, this is a warning against future prophets. Look what it says. Okay, I'm not going to get into it, but we have a warning for exactly somebody like Jesus, like what we call him, telling us that somebody is going to stand up and is going to tell you to change the Torah, to go away from the Torah. Do not try to do it. You have to always keep all the laws. Look at all these statements. Diligently keep all the commandments and his testimonies, his statutes, all these commandments, and do it what is proper. Okay? All this is in whatever. There's a whole bunch of warnings over here. How do we know this? This is straight from the Torah. Moshe told us all this. There will be no other prophet like me that will be able to tell you new laws. This is what's set up in the Torah. Okay, so let's look inside actual laws and see this in a different state. So what is the conditions of becoming a prophet? So first and foremost, we have to know that God gives prophecy to people. Prophecy is look what you have to be in order to become prophet. It's only bestowed upon very wise sage and a strong character who is never overcome by his natural inclinations in any regard. He's never sinned. Instead, with his mind, he overcomes his natural inclinations at all times. He must also possess a very broad and accurate mental capacity. He has to know the Torah extremely well. A person is full of these qualities and is physically sound, is fit for prophecy. When he enters the Pardes is the place where he has this prophecy. It's like has these visions and is drawn into this great and sublime concept. If he possesses an accurate mental capacity to comprehend and grasp them, he will become holy. Now, there's so much we can go into just to describe this. We don't have time to go into that, all the details. But I just wanted to show you the way Maimonides describes it in his book. He will advance and separate himself from the masses who proceed in the darkness of time. He must continue and diligently train himself not to have any thoughts whatsoever about fruitless things or the vanities and intrigues of the times. Instead, his mind should constantly be directed upward, bound beneath God's throne of glory, striving to comprehend the holy and pure forms and gazing the wisdom of the Holy One, blessed be he, in its entirety. Okay. When this spirit rests upon him, his soul becomes intermingled with the angels called Ishim, and he will be transformed into a different person and will understand with a knowledge different from what it was previously. Okay, so what do we see? Then we see that this is about Saul, that he will rise above the level of wise men, as the prophet told Shaul that the Spirit of God will descend upon you. So what are we seeing? That in order to become a prophet, you have to have an extremely broad knowledge. You have to be totally perfect in your behavior and 100% to the T follow the word of Hashem. Never sin, never waste any time. Okay. Now the next question is, I hope this doesn't derail us, but I want to just bring to you another. There's a fascinating story. One of the how do I say this? One of the least understood stories in the Talmud is it's a famous story known as the Tanur Achnai, the Achnai oven. Now, what was the story? The story was that there was this oven that was made up of clay parts that were stuck back together. Now, there's a whole law that clay, once it becomes impure, it cannot get rid of that impurity. It has to be broken. But the question over here is, what happens if you have broken pieces of clay that are stuck back together? Is it even susceptible to impurity? Okay, it's a whole question. Anyway, a big debate happens between the rabbis, led by a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Yeshua, and their colleague Rabbi Eliezer. Now, Rabbi Eliezer is considered to be of the greatest scholars in his time. This is also the time of Rabbi Akiva. I believe Rabbi Akiva was present at this debate, and other great people. Now, what happened, and I could be confusing some of the details, but the general idea I will give you clearly. Rabbi Eliezer believes that, I believe he said that the tanur is pure. It's not susceptible to impurity. And Rabbi Yeshua, together with the other rabbis, believed that it was susceptible to impurity. Okay? Now, there's a law in Judaism that says that the Torah tells us that if you have a debate, you have to follow the majority. Now, in this case, Rabbi Eliezer refused to follow the majority. Why did he refuse? He said, I am 100% certain of this law. I cannot accept the majority opinion in this case. And he starts to perform miracles to prove that he's correct. He says, if I am correct, let the walls of the study hall cave in. And the walls started to cave in. And Rabbi Yeshua said, the walls cannot prove a debate. Then he said, the river outside, if I'm correct, the river outside will start to flow backwards. And the river outside starts to flow backwards. And Rabbi Yeshua says, sorry, a river, miracles cannot prove. And then he said, okay, if I am correct, let a heavenly voice come down and say that I am correct. What's known as a baskol. A heavenly voice comes down saying Rabbi Eliezer is correct. Now, what would you do? I'm going to pause over here. The story's not over. But what would you do if you were a rabbi sitting in that place? What would you do? If you saw all those miracles. Now, Rabbi Eliezer was of the greatest rabbis in his time. He was supposed to be one of the smartest men ever to live. He was a very pious man. But you were on the opposing side to Rabbi Eliezer. Would you change sides to believe Rabbi Eliezer? A heavenly voice has come down to say that he is correct. Would you change your opinion?
I would.
You would? It
If
seems
it
quite
happened.
convincing to me.
If
Listen
it
to what
happened.
happens. Listen
If
to
it
what
happens.
happens. And this is a fundamental story in Talmud. What a powerful story this story teaches us about this whole concept. Rabbi Yeshua stands up and he says, God, I appreciate that you're sending voice messages like Rabbi Eliezer told you, as in, so to speak. We appreciate that you agree with Rabbi Eliezer. We appreciate, that's great, that's wonderful. But your rules say that when we're debating down here after Moses, your opinion doesn't count anymore. We decide the law now. So it's all great that you agree that Rabbi Eliezer, but as long as Rabbi Eliezer hasn't convinced us, the rabbis of here making the decision, we still, from our minds, in our perspective, based on the principles that you taught us through Moses and the principles of analyzation that you taught us through Moses, we've come to one conclusion. The fact that you and Rabbi Eliezer have a different conclusion doesn't make a difference, because you told us that we have to go based on our own teachings, our own methods, and we have to follow the majority. And the majority of rabbis currently have this decision. That's your rules, God. And therefore, your heavenly voice makes no difference. And the voice comes out and says, Nitzchuni bonai nitzchuni. My children have been victorious. My children have been victorious. Why is this such a powerful story? Because here was Rabbi Eliezer. Now, you know what actually happens to Rabbi Eliezer? Rabbi Eliezer gets ostracized, excommunicated. He was the greatest rabbi, respected by everybody, the most religious, the most pious, the smartest, but he's ostracized. What did he do wrong? He proved that he's a truly holy man with spiritual powers and real genius. Even God agrees with him. And as a result, he's being excommunicated.
He went against the Torah.
He went against the Torah. It doesn't make a difference how certain you are about your own conviction. Once the Torah has given you a principle, that principle has to stay. That principle is what kept the Jewish people while we're here till today. Because there was all types of people that were able to convince people that the Torah doesn't apply today, and that there's a new Torah and there's a New Testament and there's a new this and new that, and some people could do witchcraft. Some people had spiritual powers. But that doesn't help us, because once the Torah was given by Moses, those spiritual powers will not help. God gave us an ultimate defense mechanism, which is that I teach it to you through Moshe. Moshe is the only one that can make godly decisions and make decisions by himself. Moshe did not need the majority to agree with him. Because everyone could have argued with Moshe, it didn't make a difference. When Moshe said something, it stood. It doesn't make a difference if everybody argued with him, because Moshe he was giving the law. But once the law has been given, and now what's our job? It had to be figured out by us. So Rabbi Eliezer is excommunicated. Because from his perspective, he was 100% right. But at the end of the day, the same Torah that says that no matter how certain you are that you're right, you cannot start pulling spiritual godly tricks on us. You have to accept the majority. Okay? And this is what saved the Jewish people. So now, let me show you a few other qualifications. And let's look at the difference between how other prophets receive prophecy. Now, this concept of prophecy doesn't apply only to Moshe. There's different types of prophets. So Moshe was, as I said, he's a category to himself, unto himself. There's no one like Moshe. But then within the prophets, there are levels among levels of prophets. So he says there are a number of levels among the prophets, just as with regard to wisdom, one sage is greater than his colleague, so too with regard to prophecy, one prophet is greater than another. They all, however, share certain commonalities. They receive prophetic visions only in a visionary dream or during the day after slumber has overtaken them. I make myself known to him in a vision, I speak to him in a dream. Does that ever appear to Moshe? No. Moshe never has visions, never has dreams. God talks to him. What that means, I don't know, but it's not in a vision or a dream. So that's the way every other prophet besides for Moshe. For example, like we know that Jacob, Yaakov Avinu, he saw a ladder of angels going up and down, and there was a message that was a prophecy. When any of them prophesy, their limbs tremble, their physical powers become weak, they lose control of their senses, and thus their minds are free to comprehend what they see. As Genesis states concerning Avram, and a great dark dread fell over him. And also it says in the book of Daniel, my appearance was horribly changed and I attained no strength. In order for most human beings to be able to receive prophecy, what they had to go through is they had to be relieved of all physicality in order to get such a divine message. Now, if the prophet was of a tremendously high level, like Samuel is considered to be probably the greatest prophet besides for Moshe. He was as close, like there was indirect conversation happening. He would lie down and God would say, Samuel, Samuel, and he would say, who's calling me? Until he figured out that's the way that God called him. But it was not still direct like the way Moshe went. Okay? So they would always have it in a dream. And then when the prophet is informed of a message in a vision, it is granted to him in a metaphoric imagery. Immediately the interpretation of the imagery is imprinted upon his heart and he knows its meaning. For example, the ladder with the angels ascending and descending in the vision of the patriarch Jacob was an allegory for the empires and their subjugation and the descendants. Okay, so that's one of the understandings that Yaakov understood. Now, there's some similarly, we'll see that Ezekiel saw the boiling pot and the rod from an almond tree envisioned by Jeremiah. Okay, so how would they relate it? How do prophets relate it? Some would relate the allegory and its explanation as these did. Others would relate only the explanation. At times, they would relate only the imagery without explaining it, as can be seen in some of the prophecies of Ezekiel and Zechariah. All the prophecies came in the form of metaphoric imagery and allegories. Okay, that's the important point. That always came in some type of metaphoric way. So, now, based on what I've told you till now.
Sorry, Rabbi, I just want to ask on that point, because Rambam's explaining what process, what experience the prophets had when they prophesied.
Yes.
Did that apply to Moshe Rabbeinu as well?
No.
So
No.
he remained in his normal everyday presentation while he communicated.
That's right. Moshe Rabbeinu was the only prophet that had to divorce his wife in order to remain a prophet. It's the only person in history that the Torah has said, as in God tells him to divorce his spouse as in a direct fashion, was Moshe. Why? Because Moshe had to be available every single moment of the day to have conversation the way I talk to you with God. And that's not possible when you're involved in intimacy and all those type of relationships. Every other prophet had moments that they were involved in prophecy and moments that they were involved in mundane acts. For the first 80 years of Moshe's life, he's almost like a normal person. He doesn't really have prophecy, at least not on that same level. Okay? But he was going to be the mouthpiece of God. Moshe is the mouthpiece of God. That's why we call it Torah Moshe. So he's a prophet, but he's not really a prophet. It's really a totally different category of prophecy. He's the prophet of all prophets.
Can I ask you another question or shall I wait?
Sorry?
Can I ask you a question or shall I wait?
If you can leave it for, we're quite behind.
Okay.
Leave it to later than good, unless it's urgent for now.
No.
Okay. There's quite a few points. I probably only got through about half of what I wanted to discuss. So I want to just try to share a few more points. So the next question I want to have for you is, how do you test a prophet? How do you test to find out if a prophet is truly a good prophet? So I've already explained most of those details, but I wanted to show you within the words of Maimonides. Hold on a second, I lost the page. Okay, there is a possibility that a prophet will experience prophecy for his own sake alone, i.e. to expand his mental capacities and to increase his knowledge, allowing him to know more about the lofty concept that we know before. So sometimes people get it for themselves. So not every time that a prophet receives information is just for himself. It's also possible it will send to one of the nations of the world or to the inhabitants of a particular city or kingdom to prepare them and to inform them what they should do to prevent them from continuing in the evil path. Like, who was famous for this? Jeremiah, Jonah. When he is sent on such a mission, he is given a sign or a wonder to perform so that the people will know that God has truly sent him. Why is this important? Because you can't just come to people and say, I am a prophet, therefore believe me. People have a right to have evidence that you're a prophet. As a matter of fact, throughout the Jewish history, we've had more false prophets than real prophets. And those false prophets have caused more damage than anybody before. The first temple is almost destroyed because Jeremiah, who's the real prophet, is not listened to. Why is Jeremiah not obeyed? Because everyone's too busy listening to the false prophets. The false prophets are too busy arguing. So therefore, it's really important to have an understanding what makes a person a legitimate prophet. Not everyone who performs signs or wonders should be accepted as a prophet. Only one who is known to be fit for prophecy beforehand. So just doing magic, doing miracles doesn't help. You have to think, i.e. his wisdom and his good deeds surpass those of all his contemporaries. if he follows his path of prophecy and holiness and separating himself from worldly matters, and afterwards performs a sign or wonder and states that he was sent by God, it is a mitzvah to listen to him. As the Torah says, we read it before, listen to him. Okay, remember we saw that right at the beginning of the Shiur. Whoops. I'll show you. Elav tishma'un. Sorry, this was the words. You shall hearken his voice. That's from Deuteronomy. Okay? So, now, the Torah is commanding us, but what do you have to do before? And they first have to do two things. Number one, they have to keep all of Torah and mitzvot. You have to know that they are fit. In other words, that they never sin. You have to see them being 100% fit for the position. Afterwards, they have to have signs. And those signs could be in the form of a miracle. But if a person only does miracles and doesn't fit the role, don't believe him. If a person fits the role but doesn't do miracles, it's a struggle. You don't necessarily have to believe him because there's lots of pious people. It is possible that a person will perform a sign or wonder even though he is not a prophet. Rather, the wonder will have another cause behind it. It is nevertheless a mitzvah to listen to him. Since he is a wise man or stature or fit for prophecy, we accept his prophecy, for so have we been commanded. Okay, so if we see that the person is of a fitting stature, we could sometimes believe him. Okay, so you're commanded to render a legal judgment based on testimony of two witnesses, even though they may testify falsely. Since we know them to be accepted as witnesses, we presume that they are telling the truth. Okay, so it's the same thing. How do you know? How am I supposed to know if they're good prophets? The answer is the Torah tells us, and once we have, in other words, the Torah is saying, what Maimonides is teaching us over here, is that God gives us these rules. It could be that they will still get some false prophets getting in, but once you follow these processes, your job is now to listen. Leave the rest up to God. Just like the same Torah that says that if you have two witnesses, you should believe them. If you've done all the testing, but they could still be making it up. Yeah, but that's all you have. We cannot ourselves be prophets. Concerning these matters and the like, the hidden matters of God and our Lord, but what is revealed is for us and our children. Like it says, man sees what is revealed to his eyes, but God sees into his heart. In other words, we can only do based on what we know. All right. So that answers that question about how we know who's a real prophet. And if you're having doubt what you should do, if the person fits the categories, done miracles, then you believe them, even though, yeah, it could be that the person is not 100% legit. But if the person fits the description exactly, you have to believe them.
Rabbi, can I just interrupt?
One more second. Now, there's one more important point that could override this whole process. Is if you have a proven and accepted prophet that tells you this man is a prophet, you can believe them as well. Yes, go ahead, Fritz.
I'm not sure if I understand what you just mentioned. If somebody fits all the criteria and to be a prophet, then he makes a prediction, but it might take a long time to see if it comes out or not. How do you determine that he is a prophet? I didn't understand what you just mentioned.
Okay, so yeah, for the first prophecy, it's a little bit of a challenge. So if the first prophecy hasn't been, until the first prophecy has actually been fulfilled, if his first prophecy is something that's going to be fulfilled in many years, you're correct. But usually what is my understanding is that a prophet is given a sign initially to prove himself that is almost immediate. It's like when Moshe comes to the Jewish people, Moshe says, how will the Jewish people believe me? And God says, I'll give you two signs. You'll stick your hand into your shirt and it'll come out with leprosy. You'll stick it back and it'll go away. You'll take out your stick and you'll drop it on the floor. It'll turn into a snake and you'll put it, and these will be signs that you'll use as immediate signs in order to prove your legitimacy. So my understanding is that when God wanted someone to have prophecy, he gave them immediate signs that they can prove that they're legit.
Does it need to be an unnatural occurrence?
It has to be something that you can say this person is doing something that you have to have valid reason to believe that this person has powers to do something beyond what normal human beings can do.
Can a normal person make that decision?
Sorry?
Or does it need? does a normal person?
If a normal person has to make that decision, I'm assuming they would, but normally you wouldn't just be amongst yourselves. Normally these decisions would be made by the leaders and the seniors and the scholars of the time, that they recognize a person as being on a level of a prophecy.
Fritz, you're probably looking for a professional register of prophets and a certificate or a license that a prophet carries.
If you can give me one, that's all right.
Okay, it's a very fascinating concept. We talk about prophecies because officially, I'm just trying to think about what to do. Okay, we already finished, so we're already going over time now. So if anybody wants to, I've got a few more points that I want to make over the next few minutes that are just important for at least finishing this idea. Number one is that a prophet, one of the main tests that you have of the prophet is that even if they can do miracles and signs, and they could be pious, but one condition, as I mentioned beforehand, is they cannot go against Moshe. They cannot go against anything in the Torah. As soon as they go anything against the Torah, then you know that they're false. Now, what happens if you have a case, the story of Elijah? Now, there's a law in the Torah that says that you're not allowed to bring a sacrifice out of the temple. Once the temple or the tabernacle has been built, the temple has been built. So what happens with Elijah? Elijah says he goes and he makes builds an altar on top of Mount Har Carmel. So a prophet has a possibility, is able to sometimes change something in the Torah. It's called Hira Shah. They're allowed to make temporary changes to the Torah. So what Elijah was able to do, he was able to make a miracle come down where a fire came down from heaven and consumed the ox, right? But that was only temporary. That was only once off. But he said this is once off. So if they would have changed something permanently, you know that that is false. So they cannot ever change something permanently.
So if you
There's
say
one exception. So a prophet can come and say, we have to today eat non-kosher food. But if they say that the Torah has changed and from now on everyone can eat non-kosher food, you know that they are false. But if the person is a proven prophet and for some reason they give you a legitimate reason that why today you have to do it, you can say, okay, there's an exception, but it's only temporary. So that's why another protection, prophets can never ever prophesize against the Torah. And there's one thing that they can never do even temporary, and that is idol worship. And nobody can ever legitimize idol worship. No one can say, today you have to serve idolatry. And that's what many of the false prophets did throughout history. They said, today you're going to serve another god. And even temporarily, that is a red flag, that immediate sign that that person's a false prophet. Okay, this is a topic in and of itself, this whole section, but I just wanted to bring those major points to the thing. Now, the next point is, do all prophecies have to occur? Right? What happens if somebody prophesizes and they don't all occur? So the general portfolio is, the way things work is that, I don't know if anybody's been watching the weather over here in Melbourne lately. If you look at the weather reports, it's probably best if you don't, because you'll be really mispreparing your days. I think we were expecting major thunderstorms on Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, and none of them, I didn't see any of them occurring, but they were prophesized as such. Now, I believe that the weather people, either they were on end of year holiday season break, and they just allowed it to go on automatic, but they probably still have their jobs because they follow particular rules and ways, and then that's the way they work. It reminds me of one of my favorite little stories about the Jewish boy that was looking for employment, and he sees in the newspaper ad that the Indian tribe out in the middle of Dakota is looking for a new tribal leader. So he goes out and he applies for the job, and he needs a job. Indian tribe. He can be a leader. He's been to a seminar on leadership. He goes and he joins, and he comes to the Indian tribe. And the first question they ask him, they get him all set up. They put the whole big thing, feather head on top of him, on his head, and they appoint him as the leader. And the first question they say to him is, "What's the weather going to be this winter? How cold is it going to be?" He said, "Oh, he doesn't know." He said, "It's going to be cold." Meantime, okay, it's going to be cold. So the Indians start gathering wood. A few weeks later, they say, oh, leader, tell us, what's the weather going to be like? And say, oh, it's going to be very cold. So okay, they start gathering more wood. And then like a week later, they come again. What's the weather going to be like? Oh, it's going to be extremely cold. Wow, they're like piling up the wood like never before, making the thickest forest coats. And then like a week later, they come and they say, you know, what's the weather going to be? He's like, okay, give me a minute. Anyway, he goes and he calls the weather and he says, I don't know what you guys are doing, but you are making us freak out over here in Indian territory. They said, listen, we know nothing, but all we know is that in Indian territory in South Dakota, they're piling up wood like never before. All right, so that's our weatherman over here in Melbourne lately. He's been getting, I think, his messages from some Indian township somewhere. So with prophecy, it doesn't work that way. If you get a prophecy, if you make a prophecy and you make it wrong, you generally are proven to be a false. That's how we know. There is an exception to this, which is that we know, like the story of Yonah, which we read on Yom Kippur, that somebody could sometimes prophesy something that negative is going to happen, but it's on condition. Negative prophecies usually are on condition that the people don't listen and they don't repent. Then this will happen. But if they do listen, like Jeremiah, all those prophecies about the destruction and the death, in theory, didn't have to happen if the people would have listened to him, but they didn't. So those prophecies happened. In the time of Jonah in the story of the whale, the people did listen to him, so the prophecies don't occur. But when it comes to a positive prophecy, they do have to occur. Just a few other important points before I finish up, and that is this. There were historically 48 prophets within in the book of prophecy, and 7 female prophetesses. There are 7, I'm not going to get into all of them, 7 Gentiles. Prophets usually had miraculous powers, like Elisha we spoke about, having the power to revive the dead. There was a few others that had those powers. There was one moment in time where all Jews were able to prophesy, and that was by the splitting of the sea. We're told every single Jew that witnessed the splitting of the sea, at the moment of the splitting of the sea, they also experienced a level of prophecy. Why Gentiles have sometimes had prophets amongst themselves, the Torah tells us, is that every nation has the right to have prophets, and that people should not be able to say, well, if we would have had prophets, we would have done better. Of course, then when Bilam misuses prophecy in order to destroy as a destructive method, it is weakened amongst the Gentiles, and they don't have as many proper prophets. Okay. Now, I want to conclude with 2 points. Number one, I think the Talmud tells us that in the time of the Mishnah was the end of the era of prophets, and we no longer have prophets. So all the time for the last, whatever it is, 1900 years, we barely had prophets, which then means that there weren't many people that were able to tell the future, to prophesize things that would actually happen. We had great rabbis and scholars like Maimonides, like Rashi. They were great interpreters and commentators, but we never had real prophets. Now, what's happened, interesting, is we're told that before the time of Mashiach, prophecy will return to the Jewish people. One of the unique things about the Hasidic movement is that the Rebbes and the leaders of the Hasidic movement were not just pious people, they were also miracle workers. This happened not only within the Hasidic movement, I should say. The miracle workers were not only amongst there was all the great Sephardic rabbis and other rabbis that also had miracle powers. Any group that had a focus on Kabbalistic teachings, the spiritual teachings, as Sephardic have done. But what is unique about the last couple of generations, particularly about the Rebbe, is that the Rebbe made prophecies that came true, which led many people to believe that the Rebbe was, and possibly his predecessor, a true prophet. I'll give you an example of this, and I don't have time. I've got another meeting at 9:15, so my apologies. I normally don't book anything before 9:30, which I might be able to delay it if there's questions, so that's okay. But the Rebbe hundreds of times told people not to do things, and those things came true. But there was certain miraculous times that it happened. Most famously, when it came to the Six-Day War, the Rebbe was the only person that was blasted all over Israeli newspapers that said that we would come out victorious in a miraculous manner, and that word came true. When it came to the Gulf War, even the Yom Kippur War, the Rebbe said that they would be home, I think, by Purim. The war would be over by Purim, and people did not think so, and the Rebbe's words came true. When it came to the Gulf War, there's hundreds of videos and people that testified that had gone past the Rebbe in 91 asking, should they go to Israel? And everybody, every rabbi, every army personnel said that Israel's the most dangerous place and unsafe place on earth. And the only single voice that you can go today and find one person that said that Israel is safe and you can go travel in Israel was the Rebbe. And the Rebbe told people that they should encourage people to go to Israel. Who has the audacity to do that? Who is willing to put lives at risk to do that? No one in their right mind, unless you truly have some knowledge that the rest of us don't have. So I am beyond certain that the Rebbe was a prophet. And there was one prophecy that he made that has yet to fully come into fruition, was the prophecy that Mashiach is going to come very soon. And every other prophecy that the Rebbe made, and the list goes on and on and on, and literally if we had time we can go through them, you would see that all those prophecies were fulfilled. So therefore, I believe that very soon the prophecy of the coming of Mashiach will be happening. May it be speedily in our days.
When you say soon, what does that mean?
I'm going to conclude there. If anybody has questions, we'll take a few questions now. If anybody wants to go to sleep, thank you so much for joining. Have a good night and happy 2021. Yeah, 1 second, Fritz. You wanted to ask first. Fritz, go ahead.
תגיד לי, רבי מנדל, איפה הקבר של משה?
שנייה.
איפה הקבר של משה?
שנייה, מי אחר קודם? שנייה.
When the Mashiach is coming soon, what does that mean? Today, tonight, within 300 years?
It's a massive question, what you're saying, and it's not an answer that we can say. The Rebbe, it's a whole topic in and of itself. Okay, it's a whole topic in and of itself, what that means. Not that I necessarily know the answer, but I could tell you the Rebbe gave long discussions about that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'm going to avoid that question.
Could we have a future shiur on that question, though?
Yes.
Reuven seems to be interested as well.
Yeah. Yes, we can. We've touched on it in previous discussions. We have actually touched on it. Okay, so please God, we will.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay.
Thank you.
Have a good night. Thank you, everybody.
All the best.
Laila tov.
Bye. Have a good night. Laila tov.
Laila tov.
Thank you.